Hey, this is Huck. If you want to watch this top three asshole keep doing esports content, subscribe to Thorin's YouTube channel.
The arrival of the content aggregating website Reddit was a game changer in esports. It completely altered the paradigm in terms of the structure of how websites work with content creators, journalists, writers, interviewers, etc. It completely changed concepts of publication within esports and media in general. And finally, it also transformed the way that websites are funded, traffic metrics, and more importantly, what even the expectations can be of what is a reasonable amount of traffic for a specific type of content, type of writer, type of website. Because the old method prior to content aggregators like Reddit, because yes, sure, there was Dig before, but esports wasn't heavily featured upon that site. That wasn't a site that people used within esports. The old method was website based. So just as you might imagine now, I don't know whether people still do this, but you could imagine an NBA fan, a basketball fan, might have had NBA.com as his homepage. And every day he would click that little home button, he would go check out the latest news in the league, etc. And maybe he sees news about the NBA sports on websites such as news websites, like maybe he follows a particular newspaper online, or he reads a newspaper in real life, a physical copy, and that's where he gets the rest of his news from. So basically, it's knowing the specific platforms and explicitly going to them in the expectation of seeing what they have in terms of content on their sites. That is how the internet worked previously. So in the past, the success and the opportunity for success that your site had was heavily biased towards and based upon the reputation of the website that you wrote for. Is it one that people know? Is it considered to have the latest stuff? Is it considered to have top quality content? Do people go there already? Does it have a following as it is? Is the name value of the site something that pops off immediately? Do people have it as their homepage or within the rotation of the sites that they immediately visit on the internet? If the answer is yes, you have a chance to get the most hits available. If the answer is no, you have an extremely limited opportunity to get hits, to get exposure, to have people even find out about your work, no matter what the quality of your work is or the quality of the work on said websites. And so as a result, in the early days, there was kind of a similar concept to what Reddit would be in terms of aggregating content, in that the early websites, sure, they basically were along those lines. Like, they were a website where, how many news posters do we have? A couple, but we're not making all the news ourselves. How many writers do we have? One or two, and maybe they do a couple of things a week. So there's space on our website, right? So what we do is we fill our website that our fans come to with content from other sites. We link to an interview on a different website. We link to an article on a different website. We rewrite other people's news and link to their work. So in a sense, there already was an overlapping aspect to sites, but that was only in the early days. The problem is when sites got big enough that they had full funding themselves, entire staff teams themselves, they could do all the news, all the articles, everything themselves. They could even themselves skip out on a news being reported, and as people like HLTV used to sneakily do, I always thought it was a bit fucked up. Rather than link to someone else's post, they would just go to the same source and say, can you tell me basically the same news that you told someone else? Then when they got that news, say, oh, I got it independently, and then they wouldn't have to credit the other person who'd done the journalism. So there was some of that going on, but the point is, once you got to this point in time, they'd basically siloed off their users. This is something I talked about in the speech, the panel, whatever you want to call it, solo talk that I did for the InVen Global Conference. But I'm not going to go into all of that. Hopefully that video at some point will surface on the internet. There's also not going to be a video just talking about my own personal problems with Reddit. That would be a totally separate topic. This is more about the pros and cons of Reddit and how it changed the space. So as well as websites that were news sites and content sites themselves, you also had communities, sites that lived and died by having a healthy forum section, by having comment sections after the news. So sites like Gotfrag, HLTV.org. If you were German, maybe Read More, SK Gaming at certain points in time when that team was a massive force in esports. Going back far enough, you obviously had the likes of So Gamed. You had Domain of Games if you were in North America. You had the Cal forums if you were in Counter-Strike. You had ES Reality and XS Reality if you were a Quake fan. There were these big websites, and that was the place you went for your news. But as I said, your success was limited, or rather maybe attenuated, by your association with the big sites. So one of the things that Reddit arriving did was now people just went to Reddit. It was a content aggregator. They go to Reddit, so they go to the subreddit Global Offensive, they go to the subreddit League of Legends, they go to the subreddit Dota 2, and they go there, and that's where they get their news. If it isn't on the front page of Reddit, the first page, for most people, it doesn't exist. If it isn't on the second page of Reddit, it almost certainly doesn't exist to, let's say, 99% of people. Getting your content up there is what allows you to succeed. So that's a different challenge than having your own website and posting the news, having built up a reputation, having gotten a user base, having collected together quality writers and put together a pay structure. It's a totally different approach, doesn't require any of those things. And so in doing so, Reddit's arrival basically disassembled some of the hierarchy that existed within esports. Now you can't just silo off your users and only have them see your content. They're going to see, in theory, everyone's content. But they don't quite see everyone's, do they, because of how Reddit works. They're going to see what the rest of the community has suggested is the content they're the most interested in, that they like the most, with their upvotes, as opposed to their downvotes, which end up hiding content. So in a world in which Reddit exists, now in theory, anyone can publish an article. Anyone's article can be read on any website with any level of experience, any level of fame. It's just about whether, for whatever reason, it catches fire on Reddit. People upvote it, it captures their imagination, they like the title, it's the right timing for it, it's the right timing for that audience, it's something that when you read the first part seems really cool, or it's an interview with a really famous player and therefore it's an auto upvote for somebody who's a fan of that player. Whatever the situation might be, it was a game changer, a paradigm shatterer in terms of who could be a top content creator, and indeed who were the top content creators. There were people who wrote for massive websites, I know myself when I was editor-in-chief, who they used to tell me that they were the best writer and everyone followed their content because of how credible it was and they captured the imagination of the audience. And then they would leave that site, go to another site, they wouldn't get even a tenth of those hits. They'd be doing the same quality content, and you would want to say to those people, did you not notice it was the site, not you? Or it was the game, not you? Or it was the timing when you wrote that, not you? And it was the platform, not you. It was you a little bit, but it was actually more so the platform in that case. On Reddit, it's the opposite. Like, I could write for the biggest website in Counter-Strike, and I could get a lot of hits on Reddit, and I could write the same piece for no website. I could write it on a Medium post, a twit longer, and in theory, it could get the same amount of hits. It probably wouldn't get the same amount. The site itself would have some native endemic traffic that it did gather through people visiting it anyway, or people who wouldn't have visited Reddit otherwise. But most of the traffic, the lion's share, the vast majority, would be able to be gained, accrued purely by a Reddit link entirely. Now, this didn't immediately change esports overnight. Early on, actually, if we want to go to, say, 2010 to 2012, it was actually mainly just StarCraft 2 and League of Legends. Newer games and games that came from a very, very casual place in terms of a lot of the interest coming from the esports side, and hence it makes sense that they had their communities on Reddit. Sure, even StarCraft 2, which had initially had its community on Team Liquid, where the Western StarCraft community had been, started to see some bleed over and people starting to go to Reddit more and more and more, and crucially, people who weren't necessarily on Team Liquid going to Reddit. And obviously, you can add in secondary components, like for a lot of Americans who work in offices, Reddit's something seen as fairly harmless if you have it just to look at, because someone's not going to see it and instantly know that you're not doing work, and it's obviously got not safe for work filters and whatnot. And so you can see why this is something that built up as for people living their normal life at school, in a library, at work, commuting, to also have Reddit on the side in a way that maybe they wouldn't get away with pulling up a Counter-Strike website, or for that matter, a website if it's Counter-Strike that could be called UK Counter-Terrorist. People might not want to see that in their work history, etc. A lot easier to go through the abstraction of Reddit, isn't it? So the key for me is Reddit changed who had access to traffic via Reddit and the metrics by which traffic's even considered important. And then also, I would even add this in, how much traffic you can potentially get. Because some of the biggest subs that are esports subs on Reddit are some of the biggest subs, period, on Reddit. Like, on all of Reddit. League of Legends is an enormous sub. At one point in time, I believe it was like the 6th or 5th biggest native sub on all of Reddit. Like, main sub, basically. Not like some obscure thing that only took off briefly. So once other games like CSGO and Dota got involved, now all the big esports games, Overwatch has its own issues, have this massive faucet of traffic coming through their sub, which now esports content creators can theoretically benefit from. So there are many positives to Reddit if you could navigate it correctly, if you didn't fall afoul of some of the cons. That meant that people could be more successful, we could discover more talent in the industry, we could find people from regions and places we never would have even thought to look, and they might never have thought to publish content, and maybe they never would have found a post saying hiring, rookie intern news posters, and that would be how you'd get your normal foot in the door or knowing someone in the industry. So now obviously we have to come to the cons, right? We have to come to the bad side of the revolution. And, well, let's start off immediately with how Reddit itself works, the whole upvote, downvote system. Because the big problem with Reddit, and I know a lot of people who are more new to the internet won't be aware of this, is that the concept in theory is actually a brilliant concept. It's only a concept in theory as an abstract concept or a thought experiment. How it actually plays out in practical terms, how people actually use the website, is nothing like how it was designed. So in theory, the concept of Reddit is this. There are 3 things you can do when you see a piece of content on Reddit. If you like it, if you think it is good, you think it is relevant, you think it's causing an interesting discussion. Because one of the reasons Reddit was originally created as a content aggregator was also the idea that there'd be this content and you'd have like-minded people in a community who discuss that content in the comments. So the idea is you weren't even supposed to upvote stuff necessarily because you agree with it or you think it's great content. You might just upvote it because you think this is going to inspire interesting discussion or it is relevant to this sub, or right now actually there's something about this that I think is important, whether or not the way they tackled this topic's how I like it. The second option, the neutral option, is you see some content, it's relevant to the sub, it's relevant to the game in general, it might even, content you can see might hold interest for others, but you personally aren't interested in it, it's not something you want to read, but it's not like it's something about Quake on the League of Legends sub and therefore shouldn't even be there. So your option then, and this is the option most people do not exercise, is to do nothing. The neutral option is not to upvote, not to downvote, which is to say, essentially, I acknowledge this is content that should be allowed to exist. I don't particularly like it or think it's really good, but I also don't think it's irrelevant. I don't think it's harmful. I'll just allow it to exist. Now, if that was the option, then basically we would live in a great world because all the content that people enjoy would be being upvoted by the people who enjoy it and think it's important and relevant. All the content that people say, yeah, it is League of Legends content, but I'm not interested in myself, would just be left alone, so it would only be affected by the upvotes. And the only content getting downvoted in whatever game, whatever sub it might be, would be content that's literally irrelevant to the sub, perhaps terribly created, maybe it's very, very poor, low effort content, something like that. Essentially signaling to the mods and the automatic system that this should be hidden, this shouldn't be here, this is bad. The problem is, I think we all know at this point in time, functionally, practically everyone uses Reddit as an upvote or a downvote system. It's one of the two. You upvote if you like it and you downvote if you don't like it. As I've just said, that was never the way that Reddit was intended created, but it is the way functionally everyone uses it. They don't even need to be trained to do that. They see the downvote. They've been trained by polls and by being able to get voices, give their opinion on the internet, and they've been trained by thumbs down and all those features, whatever they call dislikes, to go ahead and say, yeah, let's get rid of this. Let's say I don't like it, therefore nobody likes it. Nobody wants to see this. I don't want to see this. Get it off my front page. And the problem is people forget their front page is everyone's front page if you're all subscribed to the same sub. And so what you do, and this is a con of Reddit, has a big impact on what other people can then do on Reddit. I used to give the analogy, it's not a perfect analogy. Most analogies are far from perfect, but on one area, it illustrates something that you might be able to appreciate better. Imagine this. So in the United Kingdom, it's quite a famous tradition on trains that if you're traveling on a train and you're reading a newspaper, if you've finished the newspaper, you would only have thrown it in the bin when you got to the office or out off the train anyway. What you tend to do is you leave that newspaper on the train after you get off the train with the logic that since I was going to throw it out anyway, if someone else happens to see it and they get on after me and they see it on the table, they're welcome to it. They can read the newspaper, they can get a little bit out of it. It's just kind of like a thing that's kind of considered a polite thing to do, a fair play measure, in the same way as some people even actually scam the train services, and when they're getting off and they have like a day ticket and they're going to go home now and they finished their day's travels, if they see you coming to the station about to go to the train booth, sometimes they'll say, do you want to use this last bit on this day card that you can go anywhere with? And they'll let you do that. It's just kind of a thing that was part of British culture, right? It still is to this day. I've seen it happen many, many times. My analogy is this. The Reddit user who downvotes is basically like someone who gets on the train after you and they see the newspaper there and they say, well, I'm not interested in this newspaper. Or even worse, maybe they see the newspaper and they go, The Sun? That's just fucking trash, isn't it? Get that out of here. And they open up that little window on the train. They chuck that newspaper out. So it goes out the window, goes off to the tracks. Now nobody can read it. That's what downvoting is like. You're not just signaling, I don't like this. You're actually signaling, I don't like it, but more importantly, it shouldn't even be on here. In fact, I don't want it to be on here. I'm going to actively participate in trying to ensure it isn't. And if enough of us feel that way, other people on this sub that this content is relevant to and might even have enjoyed it won't even be able to see it. Because we don't like it, might just be a small few people, nobody gets to read it. And so as a result, things that are otherwise niche would be very, very interesting to some people, not as much to others, but it's fairly harmless, don't succeed on Reddit generally. Largely, Reddit is for the plebs. It's about appealing to as many people as you can in a wider fashion as possible, or you have to be able to do what I can do, which is you do the piece of content you want, and if it doesn't hit, you have to have other pieces of content that do align with that to kind of prop up the piece that might not succeed otherwise. Otherwise, you cannot have opinions that go against the mob, that go against the crowd, that aren't approved of by the crowd, or more importantly, the crowd thinks should be allowed to be expressed, discussions that they think are relevant and meaningful. Now, that is a big, big problem. That is an issue. It's a different one. In the past, fans had very little choice in that sense. They could stop themselves seeing an article, but they can't stop it existing on a website. So another big problem, this is an obvious one. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail though here, because this isn't just me complaining about my own personal experiences and the ways I've been fucked over, but it would obviously be the moderators. Now, a key distinction to always make at the beginning of this part of a discussion about Reddit is a moderator and an administrator are two different things. I know in terms of a dictionary, there might even be scenarios in which they'd be considered synonyms, but in terms of Reddit, there is a very clear distinction. An administrator, or an admin for short, is someone who actually works for Reddit the company, maybe even at a physical office for Reddit the company, could be in New York, could be in San Francisco, not sure where Reddit's based entirely right now, and they actually, because they're an employee, in theory are at the top of the hierarchy. They have the most say, the most power, they oversee things, they administrate the very website itself. A moderator, on the other hand, in the case I'm talking about, is someone whose job he is essentially an unpaid volunteer, and he moderates one or more subreddits. Now, the key thing there is that the moderator, as someone who isn't an employee of Reddit, in theory, can be treated very differently by Reddit than they currently are. Because at the moment, they have a lot of power. You'd almost think they were somebody who did work for Reddit. They were part of the power structure. Well, no. What happens instead is, because Reddit, the company, has never been a massive moneymaker and has not been a site that, quite frankly, has been able to monetize very, very well, it needs a lot of volunteer workers. It doesn't have a massive amount of money, in theory, to pay people to run these sites. That's what they claim anyway. This is their words. And so as a result, they rely upon volunteers from the community, from communities that sometimes are grassroots community, had nothing to do with Reddit, making a subreddit, applying to be mods of subreddits, and then running those subreddits. And because they require those people to run those subreddits, they openly say we give them a lot of leeway. Essentially, we let the main mods of these subs do what they want. And as a result, that's kind of the payment they get for working as an unpaid volunteer, is that they get to be a little god in that subreddit. They get to say what happens, and they get to change some of the rules or how the rules are interpreted, which is actually more important than writing the rules, quite frankly. And as a result, depending on the sub, some subs, especially small subs, can be really, really cool. I've known some for bands and specific book series that had lots of great conversations, very little arguing, not a lot of downvoting, not a lot of people squabbling over stuff. But once you get to any of the big subs, especially because the kind of person who wants to become a moderator might not even be that into the game, they might just want to moderate, they might just want power for itself or to oversee a bunch of people's behavior. You get people who apply to be a mod of a big sub that's an esports sub, who are only minorly interested in the game and mainly have run other big subs on Reddit and abused their power, or run it in whatever manner they like. As I say, they get a lot of leeway. So there are cool mods, but there are also arsehole mods, and quite frankly, as is unfortunately the case in life, arsehole mods tend to win out. They tend to use arsehole methodology to fuck over the other mods, to silence the other mods, to suppress the other mods, to gain power for themselves, to oust people who could challenge their power. And they tend to then go about either rewriting rules, creating new rules, creating very, very specific rules to combat exactly what they want, and quite clearly have reverse engineered those rules, reinterpreting rules that were absolutely fine before, in a way that allows you to remove more posts down. So really, one of the big cons isn't mods as a concept. We need mods, actually. It's the very weird rules, or rather, I would say the most generous way to say it would be strange interpretations of rules which change the paradigm of how specific subs work. So, for example, obvious ones would be self-promotion rules. So where for many years they now allow you on Reddit to make a post on Twitter, as long as you use very specific verbiage, saying that you've posted something to Reddit and linking to that Reddit post, which obviously in theory means people on your Twitter could go to the Reddit post, and if they like you and they like your content, they could upvote it, right? It's a way to direct your fans to that post. Now, in the past, even though they very, very clearly did not explicitly say that that was banned, they very softly did. And essentially the implication was, if you're just too big, if you're not an absolute nobody, you're not allowed to do that, even though they wanted individual users to be allowed to do that. Because obviously the big paradox, the kind of conflict of interest that they had against their own interests was that obviously Reddit wants traffic. That is its main lifeblood. Reddit wants traffic as much as it can, and it wants as much of the content to be aggregated, uploaded as it can, and so it needs people to come to its site for that. So in theory, someone linking elsewhere allows people to come to the site and do that. Hyperlinks are one of the basic mechanisms of how the internet and the World Wide Web developed into this massive information and media network. So obviously they need people to do that, but at the same time, they're not wanting individuals to do that because they're worried that that would allow that individual to boost his content. So somehow, because he benefits and Reddit only benefits more minorly or passively, they don't want that. They want Reddit to mainly benefit and the content creators sort of somehow maybe on the side benefit. So they put all these weird rules in place like that. Obviously the whole ratio angle where again, it's considered self-promotion for a content creator to submit his own content. But that's kind of a bizarre piece of logic, right? Because if he submits it and it's not relevant, well, then people will downvote it, mods can remove it. If he submits it and it is relevant and people upvote it and people think it's good content and it is relevant and doesn't break any mod rules, then why is it bad that he was able to promote his own content in that sense? Why would that be a problem? More so than that, more so than it being a problem, why would he then need to submit 9 other things or make 9 comments to make that one post fine? Now, they would say again, oh, well, we're trying to battle, like, you know, rare cases that are bad, like people coming to spamming content. That's not what we're talking about, main content creators. Or they might say, oh, well, we don't want people to only use Reddit to get hits for their own traffic. Now, I would say that, why? Why is that a problem? If the content is that they create is good, aren't they providing content to Reddit, which Reddit then benefits from with upvotes, downvotes, comments, and traffic? And again, without content, which Reddit produces extremely little content of its own, and mods produce extremely little content, admins produce almost no content, there would be no Reddit. It would be a car with no petrol. It would be a car maybe with no engine. I guess that'd be a tough distinction to make how the analogy should go on that one. So the idea, again, that they were against that or that they were limiting that or making weird conditions, quite frankly, I think that is just a cynical way to make people who are incentivized to put content on your platform, content creators, have to basically themselves be kind of an unpaid laborer working basically as a volunteer, themselves Redditing content that has nothing to do with them. Their job, basically what you're telling them is, in that scenario, because it used to be about submission ratio, not about making comments and then submitting, you're telling them, you better work for us so that then you can benefit as well, even though we already benefited from your work as it was anyway at the same time as you did, and there's no way you could benefit and we couldn't benefit. So it shows kind of almost a conceit that content creators aren't that important, despite the fact, as I said, content is the lifeblood of Reddit. There is no Reddit without content. It would die tomorrow without content. So again, kind of a bizarre scenario. And if you see that that's the way Reddit, the site, treated people, now you can see why moderators then, in certain cases, abusing their own power or creating rules and interpretations to abuse power to certain ends, made it an even worse scenario. Similarly, when they didn't allow you to post to Reddit, they would claim, some mods, that even discussing posts that happened on Reddit, like linking to a comment or taking a screenshot of a comment, that was also considered abusive behavior if you did it onto Twitter or another social media platform. It's called brigading. They would say what you were doing is, by posting a comment that you clearly think is either funny because you laughed or you said this is stupid, you're also suggesting that people who follow you go and follow your behavior. So again, you're now some caretaker for all of the people who follow you. And when you show something, they're treated as if they're mindless soldiers that just follow your every order unquestioningly. And so as a result, even though you will have seen dozens and dozens of high up esports players, content creators, even game dev employees do these posts and not have to delete those posts, never get banned off Reddit, never even get any kind of public warning, this rule has specifically been used against certain people. Like, it has been claimed against me. It's not going to be a whole thing about me again. in cases where all I did was actually let my fans and my audience know why a piece of content was removed from Reddit. I would tell them, here's the reason why. By certain mods, they've removed it for this reason. And so as a result, you won't be able to see it for now or until the next piece of content somehow doesn't fall afoul of this rule. Now, they would sometimes try to claim there that I was, as a result, sending people to hate on them, or I was sending people to in some way brigade against them. I obviously wasn't in any sense, and that is not only an ungenerous, I would call it an absolutely false interpretation of that particular rule. And I'll also just say, as an aside, as a general methodology for dealing with people who have some kind of power over you, keyword over you in any context, if people come and they say, you're doing this thing, stop, you shouldn't do that, that's wrong, oh, you're breaking a rule, but they don't punish you, they've actually given away their hand there. What that tells you is you haven't broken a rule. You haven't done anything that they could prove was a pattern of behavior that was malicious and had broken this rule when against it. Because those people, when you break rules, don't say that and then sit around and wait for you to correct your behavior. What they do is they ban you immediately, they punish you immediately, and then you have to crawl to them and ask, what rule did I break? Or say publicly, I've been banned for some reason, and then hope that enough interest is aroused that actually you get to the bottom of it. That's what they do when you broke the rule. So actually, little hip tip for everyone, when they just say publicly or to someone else, not even you, that you're doing something in that sense, they're actually letting you know that they're doing something they don't like, that you're doing something they don't like, but it's not something they can stop right now or that they will stop right now. So they're just trying to put verbal pressure upon you. They're trying to trick you into stopping doing it because they can't or won't stop you doing it right now. Just a little aside there for when you deal with some of these people. Now, there's obviously other issues. Some of them are more specific to subs like r/League of Legends. So, for example, r/League of Legends do not, on the main sub anyway, allow discussion about the sub and why things are removed, etc. That has to go to a separate sub called League of Meta. Well, it's actually gotten even more ridiculous in the last few years. There was an episode of Listen Local, maybe like a 2-hour-long video, 1 hour 45-minute long video, and for maybe 15 minutes in this video, we discussed the Reddit mods, and we discussed them deciding to remove content or some of the rule changes they made. That video then was not allowed to be on r/League of Legends because it discusses Reddit mods, and that was deemed to be material that you're not allowed to have. Doesn't matter that all the rest of the video, over an hour of it, was League of Legends related content. Similarly, there have been videos, I've made some myself, that were an hour long, 2 hours long, and then let's say there was like a 45-minute segment just about League of Legends. Now in the past, you could just link to that segment, you could say these 45 minutes are about that segment. A lot of mods in the past wouldn't even have argued. I did money videos I gave examples from CS and from League, and because it covered enough of both, these videos were allowed on CSGO and League of Legends if those were the two games I was talking about. In that world, it was fine. Now there are rules in place, for example, on the League of Legends one, where if you just talk about League for 45 minutes, but then for half an hour you talk about something else, they can say it's not about League of Legends, if not relevant enough, even though they would absolutely, and they would consider have no cognitive dissonance, allow a video that was 5 minutes long talking about League to be on the sub, even though your video talks about League for 40 minutes more than that. So in an absolute sense, you have more League content that you are putting on the sub than that video, but yours would not be allowed and theirs would be. So you have, again, these examples of where someone rules lawyering or interpreting rules in a specific way leads to quite an unfair system, a system that doesn't seem to have a coherent rule set. As a result, it really is humans making snap decisions or making their own specific argumentation here that the precedent doesn't always carry to a future case. So obviously the human element, mods being the humans directly involved in this sense, can be a big problem. Can be something that does spoil things. I have to say myself, I make less multidiscipline content now because odds are it'll be removed from one of those subs. It won't be allowed on both the subs. In the early days of the Thorin Thoughts series, I would often get a topic which could apply to 3 or 4 games, maybe a team concept, a tactical concept, something to do with how you practice, and I would pepper it with enough examples of all the different games that it should be relevant to all those games. That stuff doesn't always get through nowadays. Some of that stuff gets removed, and as a result, just for an unfavourable interpretation of a rule, I can't make as much money from a specific sub, as much traffic from a certain sub, can't get as much exposure on my work, even though this video that has some stuff about CSGO might be really interesting to a lot of League of Legends people, or vice versa. So there's then also, I kind of alluded to it earlier, it would be one thing if mods did this, but then you could go to the admins and they could say, yes, you're right, they've unfairly applied this rule, or the way that they've actually interpreted that rule is not in the spirit of what we want Reddit to be like. The admins don't do that though. Part of the problem is that structure, that the admins basically defer to them and trade autonomy in exchange for them doing all the work for free. So on the one hand, I kind of get why mods certainly feel obliged to do that. They don't really get any other benefit from it except for like if you're just some semi-altruistic person who wants to help the community, right? So I get that they don't get compensated properly, but it's sad, unfortunately, that this leads to a scenario where you have open abuse in certain communities. In some of the other ones, it's not as bad. And in some, as I said, some small subs, everything seems pretty cool generally. One final con that the Reddit revolution basically got rid of, which might not immediately sound like a pro to some of you, is that now there's no single set of experts who can curate content. Now, to you, you might think, well, maybe I don't want that. Maybe I want to decide what my content is. That's the point. As I said before, you don't get a choice on what content you get to see. You get to see what content makes it through the filter of all the other people on Reddit. If they downvote it, I might have an article you might have enjoyed and you'd be like, oh, I didn't see that on Reddit. Yeah, maybe it didn't get to the front page that day. Maybe I posted it at the wrong time, or too much of the sentiment in the community went against my post, or maybe people were annoyed with me over some tweet I'd done totally separately and they downvoted me that day over some drama. Whatever reason, the point is you aren't getting to see all the content and then decide to vote downvote. You're only downvoting probably on the stuff on the first few pages that you wish to do in that sense. And so curation would help a lot of people in the scene get more great content. Because basically, when you went to a big website and say me or Richard or Midway or someone else was the editor-in-chief of this website, well, guess what? We can choose when you come to our homepage what the biggest banner news is, right? It's a big article that's about the money changing in Counter-Strike 1.6. Oh, it's an interview with this player who just won a tournament last week, but because it's a great interview, it's still up there on the front page a week later, and you haven't read it yet. Well, now you can get to it, you can see it, and you can see it's very high quality, and there's a lot of pictures in there because they know it's guaranteed to be on the front page, it's guaranteed to get a certain amount of traffic, and it's guaranteed to get in front of everyone's eyes. And so the types of content that can succeed, the types of writers that can succeed, even which content is more likely to succeed. Yes, there are certain elements of that I didn't like of the hegemony and siloing users that I described earlier and I described in my InVen Global Conference talk, but there were also some positives to it as well. Someone like a Kelsey Moser and Emily Rand would have had a lot more success and made much more money in their career, in my opinion, if we'd had the old site system when they'd come up. If someone like me was the editor-in-chief, I would obviously feature Kelsey's work on the front page every time. I think she's one of the best writers. I think some of her work was more important than it was popular at times, and that some of the people who never would have got a chance to see it would have enjoyed it. Some of the more niche people, or some of the people, if they'd have just seen it had like the stamp of approval of a big editor-in-chief, it was on a front page, they might have given it a try in a way they would have dismissed it if it's just any one of a bunch of content that maybe that day they're just clicking on low effort stuff, a few memes, a few short videos. They don't want to read a whole article, but it would be there for when they did, is the point. So that's another problem. You can't control how much exposure a piece or a writer or a specific topic actually gets. There's another issue. Mods can obviously limit what you even discuss. And so certain very key pieces of news or community discussions, they just determine that it's not for the community. Whereas the community itself, that might have changed everything. That might have been a big key moment, as happened with certain articles and posts of news in the past of esports. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Butt Pounder 420, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Wendelful, Chi Mao, JDubs, Alexander Rao, Blunt Smoking Anus Destroyer, Daniel Olivar, NateDOhDoubleG, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, and a special thanks go out to Jerky's Minion and weixz. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you'd like to ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Do you want teasers for my upcoming content? See who the guests are. Maybe you'd like to take part in a donator discussion with me on video. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at link in the description box below.